About 4 years ago, I filed an incident report with my timber company that still keeps me awake at night. The official version sits in a filing cabinet somewhere in the regional office in Charleston, sanitized and bureaucratic, stripped of every detail that might make someone question what really happened out there. But the real story, the one I am about to tell you, has never been shared outside my immediate family until now. My name is Billy McLeod, and I have been working timber in the Appalachian Mountains for nearly 2 decades. I have dealt with everything from equipment failures to bear encounters, from illegal poaching operations to rescue situations in terrain that would break most people. I thought I had seen it all until that October morning, when our crew got assigned to a remote section of old-growth forest in southern West Virginia, a place where the company had just secured permits to harvest. The crew consisted of 6 men. There was me as crew chief, Tommy Rodriguez running the chainsaw, Jake Wilson and Marcus Reed as our fellers, Pete Davidson operating the skidder, and a young rookie named Chris Martinez who had only been with us for 3 months. We drove into the site on a Thursday morning using an old logging road that nobody had maintained in years. We spent the first 2 hours just clearing fallen trees and branches before we could even get our trucks through. The forest was part of the Monongahela National Forest boundary, old-growth timber that had never been commercially logged. These trees were massive, white oak and tulip poplar that had to be over 200 years old. Some of the trunks were so wide that 3 men could not wrap their arms around them. The site was about 15 miles from the main road, deep enough that our cell phones showed no service at all. We set up base camp in a small clearing with our equipment trailers, a diesel generator, and a large supply tent for tools and food. The plan was straightforward. Work 10 days straight, harvest the specific marked trees that the Forestry Service had approved, then pack up and head home with a solid paycheck. Day 1 started out normal enough. Tommy fired up his chainsaw to fell the first marked oak, a massive tree that would yield premium lumber. He made his first cut, then the chainsaw just died. Not sputtered or coughed, it just stopped mid-cut like someone had flipped a switch. Tommy looked at me confused and said, "Billy, this does not make any sense. I just sharpened the chain this morning." I walked over and checked the fuel level, examined the spark plug, tested the throttle. Everything looked fine, but the chainsaw refused to start again. We switched to the backup chainsaw, and within 10 minutes the same thing happened. It died mid-cut for no apparent reason. By noon, all 3 chainsaws we had brought were completely non-functional. This made no sense because I had personally maintained every piece of equipment before the trip. These were professional-grade saws, and having all 3 fail simultaneously was not just unlikely, it was nearly impossible. We decided to use hand saws and axes for the rest of the day, figuring we would troubleshoot the chainsaws that evening. While we worked, Chris mentioned that he felt like someone was watching us. Jake laughed it off and said, "It is just the trees, rookie. They are always watching." But I noticed something that bothered me more than I wanted to admit. The crows in this area were acting strange. Normally, you cannot walk through an Appalachian forest without hearing constant bird calls, especially crows announcing your presence to everything within a mile. But here, it was eerily quiet. The crows were present, I could see them perched in the high branches, but they were completely silent. That evening back at camp, Pete mentioned that the GPS unit on his skidder kept losing signal, and his compass had been spinning randomly when he drove through certain spots in the forest. Day 2, we moved deeper into the forest to reach more of the marked trees. Marcus was the first to notice something strange. He called me over to look at carvings in the bark of several trees, deep gouges that formed patterns. These were not natural marks from animals or weather damage. Someone or something had deliberately carved symbols into the bark. Some of the symbols I did not recognize at all, while others looked like tally marks, as if someone had been counting something. Based on how the bark had healed around the cuts, I estimated these carvings were at least several years old, maybe more. As we spread out through the work area, we found multiple trees with similar markings scattered throughout the forest. Then Tommy found something that made us all stop working. He called out, "You guys need to see this." We gathered around to find animal remains arranged in a perfect circle, deer bones positioned too deliberately to be from any natural predator behavior. The skull sat in the center with ribs radiating outward like spokes on a wheel. Jake stared at it for a long moment before saying, "My grandfather was Cherokee. He used to warn me about certain areas in these mountains where old things still remain, places where people should not disturb what has been there longer than we have." That afternoon, Chris disappeared. One moment he was working 20 feet away from Marcus, and the next moment he was gone. Search for 45 minutes calling his name before Jake found him sitting against a tree about a quarter-mile from where we had been working. Chris looked dazed, confused. When I asked him what happened, he just said, "I do not know, I just lost track of time." But he seemed genuinely disoriented, like he had just woken up from a deep sleep. Then Pete noticed something. He said, "Billy, check your watch." I looked down. My watch had stopped at exactly 2:47 in the afternoon. Pete showed me his watch, also stopped at 2:47. Chris's watch showed the same time. Day 3 morning, we discovered that someone or something had visited our base camp overnight. The supply tent had been unzipped from the outside, but nothing was stolen. What disturbed us was how our equipment had been moved and rearranged. The chainsaws were placed in a perfect line, the fuel cans stacked in a pyramid shape, and all our hand tools organized by size from smallest to largest. When I asked if anyone had done this, everyone denied it. Pete said, "I was on watch until 2 in the morning. I did not see or hear anything." Then Marcus pointed at the ground. Footprints in the mud around our camp. Bare footprints that were human-shaped, but the proportions were all wrong. The prints were elongated with toes that seemed too long and heels that were too narrow. What disturbed me most was the stride length, nearly 6 feet between each print. I took photographs with my camera, making sure to get clear shots with my boot next to the prints for scale. We had a serious debate about leaving right then. Jake wanted to pack up immediately. Tommy agreed with him, but our contract had severe financial penalties for early termination without cause, and we were already 3 days into a 10-day job. Walking away would cost each of us thousands of dollars. We decided to continue, but established a watch rotation for the nights. Nobody would sleep without someone keeping guard. That afternoon, Jake was splitting a section of tree trunk when his axe struck something hard inside the wood. He said, "What in the hell?" We carefully split the wood open further and found old metal items embedded inside the living tree. There was a rusted knife blade, a piece of heavy chain, and a strange metal object we could not identify. When I counted the tree rings, these items had been inside this tree for over 50 years. Tommy tried to joke about it, saying, "Maybe we found the tree that eats things," but nobody laughed. How did metal objects get inside a living, growing tree? Day 4 morning, Tommy was not at breakfast. I walked to his tent and called his name. No response. When I unzipped his tent and looked inside, his sleeping bag was empty but still warm to the touch. His boots and jacket were still there. Nobody had heard anything overnight despite our watch rotation. I immediately organized a search. We found his trail within 20 minutes. Barefoot prints leading into the forest, but the walking pattern looked strange. The steps were uneven, like someone sleepwalking or being led against their will. We followed the trail for nearly 2 miles, deeper into the woods than we had worked yet. The trail led us to a small clearing, and there was Tommy. He stood in the center with his back toward us, completely still. I called out, "Tommy, can you hear me?" He did not respond. Jake slowly approached and grabbed his shoulder. Tommy immediately collapsed. He was alive, breathing, but completely unresponsive. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at nothing. His breathing was shallow. We carried him back to camp as quickly as we could. Tommy regained consciousness about 2 hours later, but he had no memory of leaving camp. The last thing he remembered was going to sleep in his tent. When I asked him what happened, he said, "I had this dream. There was a voice calling me, telling me to come deeper into the forest. It felt so real, Billy, like I had no choice but to follow it." I got on the emergency radio channel and contacted the company. I reported a medical emergency and requested immediate extraction. The dispatcher told me a helicopter could reach us tomorrow morning, but weather conditions made a night flight too dangerous. We had to secure the camp and wait until dawn. That night we barricaded ourselves inside the largest equipment trailer. All 6 men crammed into a space meant for 3, with the lights on and every tool we could use as a weapon within reach. Around midnight we heard sounds outside. Footsteps circling the trailer, slow and deliberate. Then something dragged across the metal roof, a scraping sound that made my teeth hurt. Scratching at the door, not frantic like an animal but methodical. Chris was near the small window. He shined his flashlight out into the darkness and suddenly jerked back. He whispered, "There is something out there, multiple somethings." I looked through the window and caught a glimpse of a figure moving between the trees. It was tall, too tall, with proportions that were wrong. The way it moved was too smooth, too fluid for anything I had ever seen. Then I saw another one and another, at least 3 or 4 of them circling our position. The sounds continued for hours. Footsteps scraping, the occasional thump against the trailer walls. Then around 3 in the morning, everything went silent, complete and total silence. We waited, barely breathing. When dawn finally broke, we cautiously opened the trailer door. Our camp had been completely ransacked. The supply tent was shredded, food scattered everywhere, equipment overturned and thrown around. But just like before, everything was arranged in deliberate patterns. The scattered cans of food formed a spiral. The overturned equipment was positioned in a perfect circle. I walked toward the camp perimeter and noticed disturbed dirt. I started clearing it away and found old logging equipment partially buried. A handsaw with the wooden handle completely rotted away, a rusted logging chain, and a tin lunch pail with a faded company logo I did not recognize. I called Jake over and we dug more carefully. We found more old tools, all of them decades old. Then we found something that made my blood run cold. An old leather work boot with bones still inside it, buried shallow in the earth. Jake kept digging and found another boot, different size, different style. I immediately said, "Stop digging. Everyone pack only essential items. Leave everything else." The helicopter arrived at 9 in the morning and we evacuated immediately, abandoning thousands of dollars worth of heavy equipment. The company was furious about the abandoned gear, but I refused to provide detailed explanations beyond equipment failure and adverse conditions. 4 years later, I still work in the timber industry, but I have never returned to that area of West Virginia. The official report blamed equipment failure and adverse weather conditions for our early evacuation. The company lost their harvesting permit after failing to complete the job, and the area is now officially designated as unsuitable for commercial logging due to unstable terrain. But I know the real reason that forest will never be logged. Tommy eventually recovered physically, but he quit the timber industry entirely and moved to Richmond. He works in an office now, says he cannot stand being in the woods anymore. Chris left the profession too, went back to school to become an accountant. The rest of our crew still works together occasionally, but we have an unspoken agreement never to discuss what happened. I kept that tin lunch pail we found. I spent weeks researching the faded logo until I finally identified it. Mountaineer Timber Company went out of business in 1967. I found newspaper archives from that year about an entire logging crew that vanished in the same general area where we had been working. 8 men disappeared without a trace. The massive search operation found only abandoned equipment and strange footprints that investigators could not explain. The case was never solved. I realized then that we were not the first crew to encounter whatever lives in that forest, and we probably will not be the last. I keep my photographs of those footprints and the carved trees in a locked drawer in my workshop. Sometimes young loggers ask me about good sites in southern West Virginia, places where the timber is old and valuable. I always steer them away from anywhere near the Monongahela boundary. I tell them some parts of the Appalachian Mountains should remain untouched, that some old-growth forests have earned the right to keep their secrets. I am scheduled to retire in 3 years, and honestly, I sleep better at night knowing that soon it will be someone else's responsibility to decide whether to tell the truth about what really lives in those ancient woods. My name is Jake Matthews, and I work as a park ranger at Daniel Boone National Forest in Kentucky. I have been doing this job for 8 years now, spending most of my time patrolling the deep forest areas, checking trails, helping hikers, and maintaining campgrounds. In March of 2023, I got transferred to the northern sector, which is the most remote and wild part of the forest. When I started going through the files for my new area, I found something that I could not stop thinking about. There was a campground called Hollowback Trail Camp that kept appearing in missing persons reports. From 2008 to 2022, every 2 or 3 years, someone would disappear there. They were all experienced hikers who vanished without a trace. The strange part was that this campground did not appear on any official maps. I went deeper into the records and found 7 missing persons cases spanning 14 years. The pattern was disturbing. They were always solo hikers or couples, always experienced outdoors people, and they always disappeared in September or October. In each case, search teams found their tents already set up, belongings untouched, no signs of struggle. Food supplies were not touched at all. Sleeping bags were still laid out like people had just stood up and walked away. Their phones and GPS devices were either turned off or completely dead. Search and rescue teams never found bodies or any trail to follow. What made it even stranger were reports from other campers who had been in the area. Some of them said they heard voices in the forest at night before their hiking partners disappeared. They described voices that sounded exactly like family members or friends calling their names. When they went to investigate, nobody was there. I checked the GPS coordinates and satellite images. Hollowback Trail Camp sat in a deep valley about 15 miles from the nearest trailhead. The surrounding area was extremely dense forest with no settlements within 30 miles in any direction. When I asked the older rangers about it, they avoided giving straight answers. They just said it was a problem area and that nobody should camp there alone overnight. My supervisor told me not to investigate too deeply, just keep hikers away from that zone. I was going through the storage room one afternoon when I found a personal locker that belonged to a ranger named Tom Bradshaw. Tom had quit suddenly in November of 2015, and nobody seemed to know why. Inside his locker were his old uniform, some equipment, and a small notebook. The notebook was a personal journal, not an official report. The first entry was dated October 15, 2015. Tom had been asked to investigate a missing persons case at Hollowback. A couple named Mark and Jennifer Chen had not made contact in 4 days. Tom went alone, carrying his radio and emergency supplies. The hike took him 8 hours. He wrote that the deeper he went, the darker and quieter the forest became. He could not hear birds or any animals. The trail was not clear, and he had to rely on his compass multiple times. He reached the campground at 4 in the afternoon as it was getting dark. He found the Chen couple's tent perfectly set up with their backpacks inside and food completely untouched. The sleeping bags were soaking wet like they had been rained on, but there had been no rain in the forecast 4 days earlier. There were no signs of struggle or blood anywhere. Tom decided to stay overnight so he could search the area in the morning. He set up his own tent about 50 feet away. His entry from October 16th at 5 in the morning described the night. At 2 in the morning, he heard voices far away that sounded like conversations, but he could not make out the words. He checked with his flashlight and saw nothing. At 4 in the morning, he heard footsteps walking in circles around his tent. Multiple people walking. He opened the tent and looked outside. Nobody was there, but the grass was trampled down like people had been walking through it. He said he felt like he was being watched constantly. Tom's entry from 2 in the afternoon on October 16th described his search of the surrounding area. Within a 2-mile radius, he found 3 other abandoned campsites. They all looked the same. Tents were intact, supplies were untouched, but no people. One site had a calendar marked up to September 2013, 2 years before Tom got there. Another site had a driver's license belonging to someone who went missing in 2010. Tom realized this was not just about the missing Chen couple. This was multiple disappearances over many years. He tried to radio back to headquarters, but all he got was static noise. His cell phone had no signal, which was expected in deep woods. He decided to hike out the next morning. His entry from 9 at night described sitting in his tent and hearing the voices again. This time they were closer and clearer. He was shocked when he heard his wife Sarah's voice calling out. She said, "Tom, where are you? I need help." But Sarah was at home 200 miles away. Tom knew this could not be real. The voice moved around his campsite, sometimes close and sometimes far away. He fought the urge to go outside and investigate. At 3 in the morning, he wrote that he could not sleep. He was hearing multiple voices now. His wife, his son, his parents, his friends. All of them were people he cared about. They all said the same thing. "Come find me. I am lost." He looked outside his tent and saw faint shapes standing between the trees in the darkness. He counted at least 15 to 20 figures standing completely still and facing his tent. He grabbed his flashlight and shined it at them. The figures disappeared instantly. He waited until dawn without sleeping. His entry from 6 in the morning on October 17th said he packed everything and started hiking out immediately. As he walked, he felt like something was following him. He heard footsteps behind him, but every time he turned around, there was nothing there. He heard whispers saying, "Stay with us. Do not leave." He hiked as fast as he could. It took him 6 hours instead of 8. His last entry was dated October 18th. He wrote that he was back at the station and had submitted an official report saying he found no evidence of the missing persons. But in his notebook, he wrote something different. He wrote, "I cannot go back there. Something is wrong with that place. The people who disappeared, I think they are still there, but they are not people anymore." Tom resigned 2 weeks later. After reading Tom's notebook, I could not let this go. I tried to find Tom Bradshaw, but there was no information on him. His family had moved away with no forwarding address. I decided I had to see Hollowback for myself. I did not tell my supervisor because he would have forbidden it. I planned to go during a long weekend off. I would go alone but be fully equipped. I brought a GPS tracker with an emergency beacon, extra batteries, weapons including bear spray and a knife, and enough food for 3 days. I told my girlfriend Emily I was going on a hiking trip on a regular route. I lied about the location. I set up a check-in schedule to text her every evening. This was October of 2023, the same month when all the disappearances happened. I started at 6 in the morning on Saturday. The weather was perfect with clear skies and mild temperatures. The first 5 miles were normal forest with occasional hikers passing by. After 5 miles, the trail was less maintained and there were no more people. After 10 miles, the trail became very faint and I had to use my GPS and Tom's notes. I noticed the forest was getting much quieter. There were no bird songs and no insects buzzing. The air felt heavier and colder. The trees were taller and thicker, blocking out more sunlight. Around 3 in the afternoon, I reached the entrance to the valley. It was a steep descent with difficult terrain. The temperature dropped noticeably, and visibility got worse as fog rolled in. At 5 in the evening, I found the Hollowback Trail camp clearing. It looked exactly like Tom had described it. I found 4 tents that were old and weathered but still standing. I checked each one. There were sleeping bags, backpacks, and personal items inside. One tent had a child's toy and family photos. I recognized them from a missing family case in 2018. Another tent had a journal with an entry dated September 2021 that stopped in the middle of a sentence. I set up my tent away from the others, near the tree line. I organized my supplies and checked my radio. All I got was static. My GPS tracker showed a weak signal but was still functioning. I texted Emily before dark and said, "All good, beautiful spot." I ate dinner, just energy bars because I did not want to cook and attract any attention. At 8 in the evening, it was completely dark. I could not see the moon through the thick canopy above. The silence was absolutely complete. At 10 at night, I was inside my tent with my headlamp on, reviewing Tom's notes. I heard a faint sound like a distant conversation. I turned off my headlamp and listened carefully. The voices were getting closer. It sounded like multiple people talking to each other. I could not make out the words, just the murmur of conversation. I unzipped my tent slightly and looked outside. The darkness was complete. I could not see anything. The voices stopped immediately. I waited for 10 minutes, then 20 minutes. Nothing happened. I zipped the tent back up and tried to sleep. At 11:30, I heard footsteps, clear sounds of feet walking on leaves and branches breaking. They were walking around the campsite in a circular pattern. I estimated there were 8 to 10 different sets of footsteps, but there were no flashlights, no voices, no visible lights of any kind. In the total darkness and complete silence, all I could hear were the footsteps. I grabbed my flashlight and hesitated. I remembered Tom's experience when he shined his light and everything disappeared. I decided to stay inside the tent and not look. The footsteps continued for 30 minutes. Then a voice called my name. It said Jake. It sounded exactly like Emily. The voice said, "Jake, where are you? I am scared. This was impossible." Emily was 200 miles away at home. The voice called again. It said, "Please, I need help. I cannot find my way." Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to go help her, but my rational mind knew this was not real. More voices joined in. I heard my dad's voice, and he died 5 years ago. I heard my high school friend Mike, who lives in California. I heard my brother. All of them were calling my name, asking for help, saying they were lost. I covered my ears and tried not to listen. At 1 in the morning, the voices stopped. Then I felt something touching my tent. The fabric was moving like fingers were brushing against it from the outside, all around the tent in a methodical pattern. Something was exploring the tent, testing it. I held my knife tightly and did not move. This continued until 3 in the morning. Then the whispers started. They were right outside the tent wall, just inches from my head. The whispers said, "Come outside, join us. We are waiting." They said, "You do not need to be afraid. We are like you." They said, "Stay here. This is where you belong." Different voices overlapped each other, creating an echo effect. I fought against the panic and stayed completely still. At 4 in the morning, everything stopped. There was sudden complete silence. I waited until 6 in the morning when the first light appeared. I unzipped my tent and looked outside. Nothing looked unusual. The ground around my tent showed no footprints and no disturbance of any kind. But the grass was flattened in a perfect circular pattern around the entire campsite. All of the abandoned tents now had their zippers opened and things scattered outside. Overnight, something had gone through them. I made the decision to leave immediately. As I started packing, I noticed figures standing at the edge of the clearing between the trees. Maybe 20 people standing completely motionless, watching me. They were too far away to see clearly through the morning fog. I grabbed my binoculars and looked. The figures looked human, but something was wrong. They were too still. Their positions were awkward, like mannequins placed randomly. I finished packing as fast as I could and started hiking out. I did not look back. I started hiking at 6:30 in the morning. The climb uphill out of the valley was difficult with my heavy pack. After 30 minutes, I heard footsteps behind me. I stopped walking and looked back. Nothing was visible. I continued walking and the footsteps resumed. Whatever was following me was maintaining the same distance and matching my pace exactly. I tried the radio again. All I got was static with occasional sounds that might have been words. I could not understand them, so I turned it off. After 2 hours of hiking, the trail seemed wrong. I checked my GPS and saw I was off course, heading in the wrong direction. I corrected my route. 15 minutes later, my GPS showed I was off course again. I realized something was leading me in circles. I decided to ignore the GPS completely and use my compass and the sun's position instead. I made my own trail through the forest. It was harder and slower, but it was necessary. I heard voices in the distance calling to me. They said, "Jake, you are going the wrong way." They said, "Come back, we will help you." I ignored them and kept moving forward. At 11 in the morning, I finally reached a point that I recognized. The trail became more visible and my GPS started working properly again. The footsteps behind me stopped. I turned around and looked. Far below at the valley entrance, I saw a group of figures standing together. They were standing completely still, watching me. I counted at least 30 of them. Even from this distance, something was wrong about the way they were standing. I hurried forward as fast as I could. At 2 in the afternoon, I reached the main trail and saw other hikers. There was a young couple with a dog. They looked normal and friendly. They asked if I was okay. I probably looked terrible. I told them I was fine, just tired from hiking. I continued past them without stopping. I walked for another hour until I reached the trailhead where my truck was parked. I had never been so relieved to see my vehicle. I drove straight home without stopping anywhere. I arrived at 7 in the evening. Emily was worried because she had not heard from me since yesterday. I told her I had lost my signal and did not mention anything about what happened. I could not sleep that night. I kept hearing whispers whenever things got quiet. I called in sick on Monday and Tuesday. On Wednesday, I went to the ranger station and submitted a report. I wrote, "Investigated Hollowback area, recommend closure for safety concerns." I did not mention the voices, the figures, or anything that could not be explained. My supervisor approved the closure immediately and had warning signs put up. Nobody questioned why I wanted it closed. 2 weeks later, I still could not stop thinking about what I experienced. I went to the local library and historical society to research the area's history. I found records showing that Hollowback Valley was the site of a logging camp in the 1930s. The camp was abandoned suddenly in October of 1937. 35 workers disappeared. Search parties found the camp completely intact with no bodies anywhere. The official explanation was that the workers had fled because of a labor dispute, but the families never believed this story. The men had left all their belongings and their money behind. I found an old newspaper article with interviews from the search party members. One man reported hearing voices in the forest and seeing figures that vanished when he got close. Another man described finding circles of flattened grass around the camp. The search was called off after 1 week because it was considered too dangerous. I dug deeper into Native American history of the region. The local Shawnee tribe had legends about that valley. They called it the place where hungry spirits wait. They believed certain places in the forest could hold souls that were unable to move on to the afterlife. These spirits would feed on the presence of living people, slowly consuming them over time. Once someone stayed in these places too long, they would become part of the place itself, not dead and not alive, but existing somewhere in between. The spirits would call to other people using the voices of their loved ones, trying to bring more people to join them and feed the place. I found Tom Bradshaw's death certificate through public records. He died in January of 2016, just 2 months after he resigned from the Ranger Service. The cause of death was listed as unexplained cardiac arrest in his sleep. He was only 43 years old with no previous health issues. I tracked down his widow, Sarah, and she agreed to meet with me. Sarah told me that after Tom came back from Hollowback, he was a completely different person. He could not sleep because he heard whispers constantly. He told her that the people from the valley were calling him back. During the last week before he died, Tom told Sarah that he needed to return to Hollowback. He said, "They will not stop until I come back. I belong there now." Sarah begged him not to go. He promised her he would not. He died that same night, peacefully in his sleep according to the medical examiner. But Sarah said his expression was not peaceful at all. He looked like he was listening to something. I filed an official request for permanent closure of the Hollowback Trail camp area. My request was approved. The area is now completely off limits with penalties for anyone caught trespassing. The official reason given was environmental concerns and dangerous terrain. The real reason is to protect people from something we cannot explain or understand. Sometimes late at night when everything is quiet, I hear whispers. I hear familiar voices. Emily calling my name. My brother asking where I am. Friends saying they need my help. I know it is not real. But there is a part of me, the part that saw those figures standing in the fog and heard those footsteps circling my tent, that part knows the truth. They are still there in Hollowback Valley. They are waiting, and they remember me. I am 31 years old now, and I am planning to leave the Ranger Service next year. I want to move away from Kentucky, away from these mountains. I am hoping that distance will help. I am hoping they will forget about me eventually. But sometimes I think about the others. Mark and Jennifer Chen, the families who disappeared, the loggers from 1937. Are they still there in that valley? Are they standing between the trees calling out to hikers who pass through? Are they waiting for someone to stay long enough to join them? I do not know the answer, and I never want to find out. Hollowback Trail Camp is officially closed now, but warning signs do not stop everyone. Last month, a young hiker ignored all the signs and went in alone. He has not been seen since. Search and rescue teams could not find anything. Just another name added to the list. Another voice calling in the darkness. I never reported what I really saw out there. I never told anyone about the figures, the whispers, or the circles in the grass. Who would believe me? But I am writing this account now and putting down everything that happened. Not for publication and not for any official records. I am writing this so that someone will know the truth. If anything ever happens to me, if I disappear or die unexpectedly, someone will understand where I really went. And maybe they will know better than to go looking for me in those deep Appalachian woods. My grandmother came over from England in 1968, carrying nothing but her compass and a passion for understanding the stone layers beneath mountains. She taught my mother the trade, and my mother taught me. 3 generations of Mitchell women have made their living surveying the geological mysteries of Appalachia, and we thought we knew every rock formation, every cave system, every ridge from Tennessee to West Virginia. We were wrong. The project came to us through a contact at Meridian Mining Corporation, a mineral survey contract for private land in the remote mountains of southern Virginia. The property owner, some development company from Charleston, wanted to assess mineral deposits before deciding on extraction operations. It was good money, enough to keep our small team busy through the winter months when most survey work dried up. The land itself was stunning in the way untouched wilderness can be. Rolling mountains covered in pine and oak forests that had been growing since before the Civil War. The limestone formations we were contracted to survey were massive, with exposed rock faces that would require our most sophisticated equipment and careful analysis to map properly. The access road was rough, barely wide enough for our jeeps, but we had worked in more challenging terrain. Our team consisted of 4 people, including myself. There was Marcus Chen from California, our geological mapping specialist who could read terrain like most people read books. He had this uncanny ability to predict underground structures just by examining surface features. David Rodriguez from Texas operated our core drilling equipment. 20 years of experience had taught him to extract samples from depths that would challenge less skilled engineers. And Lisa Park, barely 24 years old but already showing exceptional talent with ground-penetrating radar technology. We had worked together for 2 years and operated with the kind of efficiency that comes from complete mutual trust. The first week went exactly as we hoped. We established our base camp near the access road and began working systematically through the survey grid. The geology was fascinating, mostly limestone and sandstone with some scattered shale layers. The weather stayed clear and our equipment ran without any significant problems. By Friday afternoon, we had drilled 12 core samples, mapped 40% of the survey area, and discovered promising signs of copper and zinc ore at depth. Lisa's radar had revealed complex cave systems beneath us, exactly the kind of formations that often indicated valuable mineral deposits. We were ahead of schedule and optimistic about completing the project early. It was during the second week that things began to feel wrong. The change was subtle at first, the kind of shift in atmosphere that experienced field workers learned to notice but struggled to explain. The forest seemed quieter than it should have been. Birds that had been active during our first week became scarce. The usual sounds of deer and small animals moving through the underbrush faded to an unnatural silence that made our drilling equipment seem unnaturally loud in the stillness. Marcus mentioned it first during our lunch break on Monday. He had been mapping terrain about 300 meters from camp when he noticed his GPS compass was giving inconsistent readings. "Just a few degrees off," he said, frowning at his device, "but I can't explain why." David went to investigate with a magnetometer, checking for unusual magnetic sources that might interfere with navigation equipment. He found nothing that would account for the deviation, but the readings remained inaccurate in that specific area. That afternoon, Lisa made a discovery that shifted our concern into something deeper. She was using ground-penetrating radar to scan the substrata beneath an exposed rock ledge when her equipment revealed a large hollow structure underground, approximately 50 feet down. "This is not a natural cave," she said, showing us the screen. "Look at the shape. Too regular, too geometric." The cavity appeared rectangular, almost like a room or tunnel that had been deliberately created. The surrounding rock composition showed no signs of water erosion or natural formation processes. Tuesday morning, David was drilling a core sample at 80 feet depth when he pulled up something that made all of us stop working. Embedded in the rock sample was a piece of metal, thin and corroded, but unmistakably manufactured. "This is not natural ore," David said quietly, examining it under magnification. The metal fragment had a shape suggesting it was once part of a tool or equipment. Quick analysis revealed an alloy composition that did not match any naturally occurring mineral combination. Based on the oxidation layer and the geological strata it came from, the metal had been there for at least 200 years. That afternoon, Marcus discovered something while creating detailed topographical maps. Several exposed rock outcrops in our survey area were arranged in geometric patterns. "These are not random," he said, spreading out his sketches. "Look at the angles. Perfect right angles and straight lines extending about 200 meters across the terrain. The formations resembled the foundation of an ancient structure that had been buried and partially revealed by erosion over centuries." By Wednesday of that second week, our equipment problems had escalated from minor annoyances to serious operational failures. David's core drill lost power repeatedly when operating in certain areas. It would run perfectly 50 feet away, then die completely when moved into what we started calling the anomaly zone. We tested it 3 times with identical results. Our mechanic found nothing wrong with the machinery, yet it refused to function in that specific location. Lisa's ground-penetrating radar displayed distorted images and signal interference when scanning the central area. The reflected signals violated normal physics, bouncing back at angles that should not be possible. "It is like something down there is actively interfering with the electromagnetic waves," she said, her voice uncertain. "We tried backup equipment with the same results." Marcus's compass had become completely unreliable within a 100-meter radius of the center point. The needle spun continuously, unable to find magnetic north. GPS signals dropped entirely. He had to resort to traditional orientation methods using the sun and landmarks to navigate. That evening, Marcus found old survey records at the county geological library. A different team had worked this exact area in 1952. Their maps included a notation that read "anomalous zone, recommend discontinuation." There were warning symbols we did not recognize. The official report stated the team had completed their work and departed normally. But handwritten notes in the margin of one map said something different. "Do not return," they warned us. Thursday afternoon, David found a piece of abandoned equipment near a stream about a kilometer from our camp. It was a core drill, probably from the 1950s based on the design. The condition was remarkably good for equipment that had been exposed to weather for 7 decades. The faded logo read, "Apex Geological Survey 1952. This was the same team Muckas had found in the historical records. "Why would they leave expensive equipment behind?" David asked, running his hand over the surprisingly intact metal. "There is no record of lost equipment in any of the reports." Lisa researched the Apex Geological Survey that night. The company had closed in 1953, just 1 year after this Virginia project. All 4 team members from this survey had resigned abruptly. None of them continued working in geology. 2 had emigrated to other countries immediately afterward. There were no interviews or explanations recorded anywhere. Friday morning, We decided to do one final direct survey of the anomaly zone before deciding whether to continue the project. Muckas and I hiked in to examine the terrain in detail. We found an old trail, overgrown but still visible, leading deeper into the forest. Following it for about 500 meters, we reached a natural clearing roughly 80 feet in diameter. No trees grew within this space. The soil was darker, with a different texture than the surrounding forest floor. I collected soil samples. Later analysis would show abnormally high levels of carbon and heavy metals, consistent with either intense fire or an extreme heat event. Around the clearing's perimeter stood 12 large rock outcrops, arranged in a perfect circle. Each was about 4 feet tall, weighing several tons. The surfaces bore weathered carvings, deep grooves forming geometric patterns that were clearly not natural erosion. I used my handheld seismometer and detected continuous low-frequency vibrations. "This is not geological activity," I said, watching the readings. "The frequency is too regular, like machinery." The source appeared to be approximately 150 feet underground, exactly the depth of the hollow structure Lisa had found with radar. As we prepared to leave, we both heard it. A low, resonant humming, almost like voices but not in any language I recognized. The sound echoed from beneath the ground, increasing gradually in volume. Muckas checked his compass. The needle was spinning wildly. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in seconds. We both felt pressure in our ears, like descending rapidly in an aircraft. "We need to go," Muckas said, "right now." We moved quickly back along the trail. Halfway to camp, I looked back. Something was moving in the clearing. The distance and lighting made it hard to see clearly, but I was certain a tall shape stood at the center of the stone circle. It was not human, not any animal I knew. Perhaps 7 or 8 feet tall, completely motionless. I did not look back again. When we reached camp and told David and Lisa what we had seen, the decision was unanimous. We would pack up and leave Saturday morning, but we would not make it that long. Friday night around 9 o'clock, we were securing essential equipment when our generator died suddenly. David checked it immediately. The fuel tank was full. Every component appeared functional, but it would not restart. He tried our backup generator. It started, ran for 3 minutes, then died with a high-pitched whine like an overloaded motor, though it was under no significant load. We gathered around the campfire, using flashlights and battery-powered lanterns. Lisa suggested leaving immediately, but the winding road was treacherous to navigate in darkness. We decided to wait until dawn, taking turns on watch. At 11 o'clock, Muckas was on watch when he heard it, a rhythmic pounding from the distance, not wood. The sound was deep, resonant, like someone striking massive metal or stone. He woke everyone. We all listened. The pounding was steady, each strike about 3 seconds apart. It came from the direction of the clearing we had found. The volume was increasing steadily, as if the source was moving closer to our camp. I checked my seismometer. The vibrations had increased tenfold since that afternoon. The frequency was no longer steady. There were complex patterns in the waves, almost like encoded information, like something was transmitting a message through the ground itself. At midnight, the temperature plummeted from 60 degrees Fahrenheit to 35 in under 10 minutes. Our breath condensed into white vapor. The campfire seemed to provide no warmth. David added more wood, but the flames would not burn hotter. Stranger still, the fire was burning with an eerie greenish-blue color instead of normal orange-yellow. "Look," Lisa said, pointing toward the forest. Strange lights flickered between the trees, not flashlights or fire. A pale blue-green luminescence that pulsed and moved horizontally through the darkness. The lights were about 200 meters away, gradually moving closer to our position. The pounding was now so loud it shook our tents. Metal equipment fell from tables. The ground trembled with each impact. Muckas measured the sound with his phone app. 90 decibels, yet we could see no source for the noise. The blue lights became clearer. Now only 100 meters away, we could distinguish vague shapes within the glow. Tall, elongated forms that moved unlike any person or animal. They seemed to glide across the ground rather than walk. There were 3 of them, all approaching our camp. David ran to the Jeep and tried to start it. The engine would not turn over, just weak clicking sounds. The battery had power, but the vehicle refused to start. "We walk," I said. "Right now, take only essentials." We grabbed backpacks, water, flashlights, and radios. We left all survey equipment behind and started running down the trail in darkness. Looking back, I saw the 3 glowing shapes had entered our camp. They stood around the dying fire. The pounding sound now came from directly beneath the campsite. The ground was cracking, forming glowing fissures of blue-green light, as if something was rising from deep below. We ran through the dark forest, flashlights bouncing. The trail was treacherous with roots and rocks, but fear drove us faster than caution. The blue lights followed us, maintaining a distance of about 100 meters. They never came closer but never fell behind either, as if herding us in a specific direction. After 15 minutes, Muckas stopped. "We are not on the right path," he said, breathing hard. "I have walked this trail dozens of times. This terrain is wrong. These rock formations, I do not remember them. The trees are arranged differently." Lisa checked her compass. The needle still spun uselessly. GPS showed no signal. We were lost in a forest we thought we knew. "We cannot stop," David said. "Those things get closer when we stop moving." We continued, choosing direction by instinct, hopping to find the access road. At 1 in the morning, we emerged into a clearing I recognized with sinking dread. We were back at the stone circle, the place we had been running from. "No," Marcus said. "We went downhill, away from this area. We should not be here." The 12 stone outcrops glowed with the same blue-green light. The carved symbols seemed to pulse with energy. In the center of the circle stood 7 tall shapes, no longer indistinct glows but clearly visible. They were not human, not biological at all. They appeared to be made of light and shadow, constantly shifting between solid and translucent. Each was over 7 feet tall, with elongated proportions that defied anatomy. The pounding had stopped. The forest was completely silent. Even our breathing seemed muted, absorbed by the unnatural quiet. The shapes did not move toward us. They simply stood there, arranged in formation, as if waiting. Then one of them extended something like an arm, pointing toward the ground at the circle's center. The earth began to open, not cracking or splitting but smoothly retracting like a mechanical hatch. Blue light poured from the widening aperture. We could see metal edges, smooth and manufactured, revealing a shaft or tunnel descending into the earth. "They want us to go down," Lisa whispered. "We run," I said. "Pick a direction and run until we find the road or die trying." We bolted between 2 of the standing stones, crashing through undergrowth. This time the lights did pursue. They moved with impossible speed, cutting off our escape routes, forcing us back toward the circle. We tried 3 times to break through, each time turned back by the glowing shapes that moved faster than we could run. Exhausted and surrounded, we stood at the circle's edge. The shaft in the center had fully opened, revealing metal stairs descending into artificial light. "Maybe if we see what they want," David said hesitantly, "they will let us leave." "Or we die down there," Marcus countered. We had no choices left. Together, we descended the metal stairs. They were solid, cold, made of some alloy I did not recognize. The shaft went down approximately 100 feet before opening into a chamber. What we found there defied everything we understood. The room was vast, carved from solid rock but lined with metal panels covered in the same symbols we had seen on the trees and stones. Equipment filled the space, machinery that appeared both ancient and impossibly advanced. Some pieces were clearly corroded and failing, sparking and humming erratically. In the chamber's center stood a device like nothing I had ever seen, a complex arrangement of rotating components and energy fields that hurt to look at directly. On the far wall, we found them. The Apex Survey team from 1952. 4 skeletons in decayed field clothes huddled in a corner. One still clutched a notebook. I carefully retrieved it. The final entry, dated October 7, 1952, read, "We tried to leave, but the path always returns us here. They do not harm us but will not let us go. The machine is failing. They need someone with knowledge to repair it. I do not understand the technology. None of us do. I think we will die here. If anyone finds this, do not try to fix their machine. Just run. Keep running until you reach civilization." "They brought us here to repair this," Marcus said, looking at the malfunctioning device. Lisa was already examining the equipment with her engineer's eye. "Some of this technology is familiar," she said slowly. "The principles are similar to our radar systems, energy projection and reception. I think this is some kind of transmitter or beacon." The 7 shapes had followed us down. They stood at the chamber's entrance, blocking our exit, waiting. "We have a choice," I said. "Die here like the Apex team, or try to repair their machine and hope they let us go." We spent 6 hours working on that alien technology. Lisa identified failing components that resembled capacitors and conductors. David used tools from his pack to replace corroded connections. Marcus and I mapped the energy flow patterns, trying to understand the system's purpose. It was the most terrifying work of my life, knowing those shapes watched our every move, knowing the Apex team had failed this same test. Finally, Lisa replaced a key component with a modified piece from her own radar equipment. The machine's erratic humming smoothed into a steady tone. The rotating elements accelerated, the energy field stabilized. A beam of blue light shot upward through the shaft, piercing into the sky. The 7 shapes moved aside from the entrance. One pointed up the stairs. We did not wait for further invitation. We climbed those metal steps faster than we had descended, emerging into pre-dawn darkness. The stone circle was dark and silent. The shapes were gone. Our compass worked again. GPS signal returned. We ran down the correct trail and reached our camp as the sun rose. Our vehicles started immediately. We loaded nothing, just drove straight out to the highway. At the first town, we called Meridian Mining and terminated the contract, citing dangerous geological instability. When we tried to report the location and what we had found, our contact said the development company had dissolved 4 days earlier and no mining operations had been authorized on that property. 6 months later, Marcus drove past the access road. He reported that our campsite was completely overgrown, appearing abandoned for years rather than months. There was no sign of our generators, drilling equipment, or any evidence we had been there. I still work geological surveys in the Appalachian Mountains, but I have learned to recognize signs that tell you when land does not want to be disturbed. Some places hold secrets that were never meant for human understanding. The Apex team learned that lesson 70 years ago. We were luckier. Or perhaps we were simply better at following instructions from those who had been waiting underground for longer than our civilization has existed. I never reported the full truth because who would believe it? But I keep that notebook from 1952 in my desk, a reminder that some contracts should never be accepted, and some beacons in the deep woods should be left alone.